Let's do this. The Cult of Hockey podcast by the faithful and for the faithful. I'm David Staples of the Edmonton Journal, and I'm here today with Bruce McCurdy. Welcome, Bruce.
Hey, David.
So the Oilers bought out Sekera, and
Oilers.
a lot of unhappy fans again, just like the Broberg draft pick. Man, Oiler fans are unhappy these days. This one, I did a quick Twitter poll on whether the buyout's a good idea, and it's close. More fans than not think it wasn't a good idea to do it.
Mm-hmm.
I voted. I mean, it's still early, of course, because if the Oilers don't use this cap space, like they didn't use the Benoit Pouliot cap space, this is a big mess.
Yeah.
And that's a distinct possibility, right? We heard they were in on Brett Connolly, but he might not be coming here, and Jonas Donskoy, but he might not be coming here. Anyway, today we're just going to talk about this buyout. And what's your initial reaction?
Well, first of all, I'd like to raise a hockey mug to Andre Sekera, a personal favorite of mine, and I enjoyed watching him as an Oiler for 2 years. And I grieved with a lost 2 years to injury that really seriously crushed the Oilers as a team, missing the player that had been Andre Sekera these last 2 years, and they were unable to replace him and missed him badly. And the unfortunate outcome of leaving the manager between a rock and a hard place in terms of trying to find residual value in a huge cap hit of $5.5 million on a player who, when he did return from injury last year, as decent as he looked superficially, was heavily sheltered to almost the degree that a rookie would be in terms of how he was used during the end stages of the season, and the hard decision that had to be made. And
he played about 15 minutes a night against soft competition.
mm-hmm.
He did very well in that role. And there was, I think, a reasonable expectation that he could maybe step up and play in a top four role next year. The problem is this, Bruce. There's all these kinds of moving balls. The Oilers have too many players on defense. They absolutely had to move out a veteran player. They just can't keep going. Like this wasn't a great defense to start with. And they needed turnover. They need more puck movers. Now Sekera, it happens, was probably the single best puck moving defenseman. At least he had been certainly the best. But we don't know how he would have done in a higher role. I think he would have been okay, but could he defend in that role or not? That's the question. Anyway, they had to move somebody out. The best thing that could have happened is they moved out Sekera or Russell, the two very high paid veteran players who are older, the natural candidates to get moved out, and retain some salary and move them out that way. The benefit of that is you retain the salary for the next 2 years, but you don't get a big cap penalty in years 3 and 4 afterwards, which is what happens in a buyout. So now the Oilers have this huge cap penalty of $1.5 million a year, not this year or next year, but in the 2 seasons following that against their cap. And that hurts them down the road quite a lot. And just like the Benoit Pouliot buyout continues to hurt the Oilers right now against the cap. So that said, though, Bruce, they had to move out a defenseman, and they needed cap space. So when you add those two things together, the one guy that made the most sense by far was Sekera. Moving him out, you get an extra, $5 million in cap space the next 2 years?
$3 million this year, $3 million next year,
$6 million.
$6 million.
And I think with Russell, it's just a total of $4 million.
It was just 1 year where there was significant savings on Russell of $3 million. Then next year he's got a bonus due, and his actual salary is lower, meaning that the buyout is less, meaning the savings are less. It's kind of a convoluted process, but basically it comes down to 2 years of $3 million savings, Sekera versus just one for Russell, with a very similar sort of 2-year residual due on the player. I think in Russell's case, it would have been $1 million or so for the last extra 2 years as opposed to 1.5.
So okay,
So,
so you need to move out a veteran defenseman, right,
mhm,
to make space for Caleb Jones, who's clearly ready to play, and maybe Lagesson and Joel Persson. So you need to move out at least one guy. So check, they've done that.
mhm,
You needed to move out because the cap was lower than expected.
yep,
You needed more cap space. So check.
mhm,
That's done too. So there's two things that were accomplished today. The downsides are you didn't do that you didn't do that as perfectly as one might have hoped. You didn't trade away Sekera or Russell and
right.
retain salary. That would have been the best bet by far. And Holland would have got an A plus if he could have done that, Bruce, but he was unable to do that. So what does that say? Now, some people are saying, well, what I'm is Holland's just not able to make trades. For whatever
Mhm,
reason, he can't make trades. But it seems to me, Bruce, that if you're going to buy that line of reasoning, you have to accept two things. You have to accept that Holland maybe isn't very good at making trades. So maybe we can accept that, right? Maybe that's the record. But then you have to also accept that Andre Sekera is out there on the market at half price, $2.5 million, and every
mhm,
other GM knows this,
right.
but they refuse. So
Yep.
if it was a bad move not to make that, they're all those other GMs are incompetent as well because they've assessed Sekera at that amount of money, 2.75 million per year, and they haven't bought him. So if you think this is a total screw up on Holland's part, I think you also have to accept this is a total screw up of every other GM out there as well, logically. And I don't think so. What I think is the clear message is the market for Sekera isn't
Oh,
$2.75
nowhere
million per
close.
year for the next 2 years. That's why the Oilers couldn't move him. That's the only reasonable. I think it's like honestly, it's the only reasonable interpretation. Is Holland tried to move this player? Of
Yep.
course he did. He was unable to do that because Sekera wasn't valued that way by other GMs. Does that make sense to you, Bruce?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I was in a DM conversation with a friend who was making this point, saying Oilers, questioning Oilers fans who thought Holland didn't try and trade the guy. And I wrote back in all caps, of course he tried to trade the guy. I mean, there's no other possible scenario that makes any sense whatever that he tried. But even at 2.75 million, a 33-year-old defenseman with now unfortunately grievous history of injury that's cost him his last two seasons. If you're a GM, you say, well, they'll buy him out, and I can probably pick the guy up for 1.5 on the open market, or there's multiple scenarios. Uh,
So what do you
but
think he gets at most, Bruce? Now, so I think a team would be wise to sign Sekera. What do you
yeah,
think he's worth? What would you like if you were recommending to the GM of the other team? What's the most you'd? Let's say there's even a little bidding war for Sekera, which I think is entirely possible. What would you say? What's the highest we're going to go
uh, 2 million maybe,
on a
and
year, 1 year or two?
1 year would be the other thing, not 2 years, but give him a year and see what's left. I think there's a strong possibility, frankly, he winds up back in Europe. But
I'd go as high. I'd go for Sekera. I'd go on a 1 year deal if I had the cap space. I'd go if I needed defensemen. If
mhm.
I had all those things, I'd go as high as $3 million a year for
Yeah,
1 year. On a 2 year deal, man,
yeah.
I'd be looking more like 2 million, 2 million at 2 years, I think. And I'm a, so I and you can see from me saying this, I'm a huge believer in this player. Like
Oh, I know you've
I didn't
supported him.
believe that he could come back, but he did come back. I thought he passed the test coming back against third pairing third grit tensity competition in a
Hmm.
third pairing role in the Oilers. He passed that test. He went to play for Slovakia at the Worlds. He passed that test on a
Yeah.
top pairing, playing 25 minutes a game. So I think that Andre Sekera actually has quite a bit of value as an NHL player on a 1 year deal. But then you'll know, like we still don't know. So to go 2 years, I think you'd be crazy. So I'm okay with a bit of an overpay, like I say, 3 million is an overpay on 1 year. But
Hmm.
you'll know, like if he comes through as a second pairing D man, that's a bargain contract at the NHL level. And I think there's a it's a decent bet that he's going to come through at that. So if you're desperate for a D man, I could see you going as high on as that on a 1 year deal. What I think he's going to get is about 1.5 million on a
Yeah.
1 year deal. That's what I think is going to happen because I don't think other teams. I think I value him more. Maybe it's because I'm a fan, or maybe because
Hmm.
I've watched. Maybe I'm right, but
Hmm.
maybe probably because I'm a fan and I overvalue him. But that's what I would give him. So
Yeah, I mean, we're all fans, I think, and I mean, this is a hugely popular player, and this is a bitter pill for oil fans, and I've noticed over the time that we're talking about ways of making cap space that people have fiercely defended this guy, have consistently pointed the finger at Chris Russell as the guy to go over Andre Sekera. Uh, Even as Russell has played as many games in 3 years as Sekera did in four with the Oilers, even as Russell's cap hit is 1.5 million, which is like the cost of a hockey player, less than Sekera's, and even as the buyout, as mentioned before, is only really 1 year of value for Russell versus two for Sekera. I think they. I was hoping that maybe Russell would be traded because I thought they could get close to value. I mean, when I saw Justin Braun get traded for a second and third round pick with no retention, and you look at those two players, and I mean, they're not the same player, but they sure have a lot in common in terms of what they've accomplished over their career, where they're at in their career, what their role is. Um, but
Russell has a he could only be traded to 10 teams. Maybe he doesn't want to be traded, and maybe like he gives the 10 teams. It's his pick on the 10 teams. He could give 10 teams that are up against the cap and don't need a defenseman.
well, Sekera and Russell until today had no movement clauses. So, I mean, Sekera was going to give a list tomorrow of 15 teams, and I very strongly suspect they went to him and his agent. Uh, 1 or 2 months ago and said, why don't you give us that list now? Because we're going to inquire around because we really don't want to have to buy you out. And you probably don't want that either. But of course, all that is conducted in secrecy, and we're probably never going to find out, what did happen as they tried to move him. All we know is what didn't happen, which is they didn't move him. And so, but you know what, David, if you look at his role here in Edmonton, and I would say that uh, the Andre Sekera we saw in 2016-17 was fairly comparable to what Lubomir Wisnowski brought to the Edmonton Oilers during his brief but memorable tenure here in Edmonton. Among the very finest seasons of a defenseman that we've seen in a decade. Uh, but you know what? He went from his first year in Edmonton, he played 40% of his minutes against elite competition. This is according to Puck IQ.
You're talking about Sekera now.
Sekera, advanced stats site set up by local fellows. 40% in 2015-16, 35% in virtual tie with everybody in the top four in 16-17 against, and then after the injury came back 2 years ago, 19%. And this past year, coming back from another injury, 18% against elite competition, by far the lowest on the team. And when I wrote the Sekera season review a few weeks ago, I compared. I said, what's that 18% mean, really? In Calgary, they have Juuso Välimäki, a rookie who played 19%, Rasmus Andersson, a rookie, 17%, Oliver Shillington, rookie, 14%, and all their veterans, Giordano 42%, Brody 42%, Hamonic 34%. Sekera really was being deployed so gingerly as to be comparable to a rookie. But of course, rookies don't make 5.5 million. They don't make 3 million. They don't make 2.5 million. They make 900,000.
So they really tried to give him every advantage in terms of his comeback and maybe even pumping up his value.
And
I don't think they were doing that. I think they were just trying to help him settle back in.
They tried to get him fit where he could help the team the most. And him and Benning, they were an okay third pairing, but third pairing D-men and 5.5 million, that just doesn't really go together. So
the thing I like about this,
was he ready to take on more? Well, we don't know.
The thing I like about this, Bruce, was I really like Caleb Jones. Mm-hmm. And I'm glad that they've you have to make room for players who are ready. Mm-hmm. He's overripe. He's been there 2 years. He's excelled at that level of play. He excelled in a third pairing role when he came to the Oilers, and then crashed in a top pairing role when he came to the Oilers. Caleb Jones did. So you've got to make room for him. Mm-hmm. And they did. And I'm really glad that Caleb, this to me is a strong indication. Like, they believe in this player. He's going to be on the Oilers this coming year. Like, thank goodness that we're not going to have like the same 6 defensemen who we had at the end of last year, all those veteran guys. They weren't cutting it, and they've got to do something. So shake the box, shake it up a little bit and see what comes out next. Now, I would have preferred that shake be again than a trade. That trade clearly wasn't there. So in the end, I'm okay. Like, I'm not happy with this. Obviously, I'm a big Sekera fan, and I'm not happy with how this has turned out. And I wish that Holland had found a way to make a trade. Was really thinking that was a possibility either for Sekera or Russell. And I don't like the idea that maybe possibly they chose Russell over Sekera, like in terms of keeping a player. Like I could see the argument of buy, like even though the Russell buyout was less good, it was still pretty good. And I like Sekera better than Russell, but Russell's been a decent, very solid defensive player. So I'm not even going to get into that. So I think that's okay too. So anyway, I'm okay with this in the end. I'm
not to me. Is that buyout better? I mean, for Russell, it would have been 1 year good, 3 years bad, because it would have cost them more to replace him next year than they saved on the cap, and then of course 2 years of penalty after that.
And Chris Russell's a very useful player. Like, he's a really solid defensive defenseman, and he's can play both sides of the ice. So there's that to be said for Chris Russell as well. And might have been harder in terms of trading Russell. It might just not have been possible. So you're right. Then the only issue is whether you buy him out or not. And I think they probably would have, if they could have traded either one of these guys, they would have done it, but they couldn't. So the best buyout is Sekera. So done.
Yeah, I guess that's the case. I mean, what I'm not going to do here is throw stones at Ken Holland for not doing due diligence, because we just don't know what all went on behind the scenes. But the sad fact remains that Oilers needed to have a little more cap space to address some of the concerns that they have. And as you say, just an in-roster exchange of Sekera for Caleb Jones, that opens up about almost 2.3 million, which might be the difference between picking up a minor leaguer or picking up a solid NHL winger on the open market as early as tomorrow.
Here's the bad news, Bruce.
Mm-hmm.
When you look at UFA signings on July 1st UFA signings, and how many of them turn out? Only about a third of them.
Mm-hmm.
And when I say only about a third of them, that means on their new contract, they play at least half of that new contract at peak or near peak. To me, that's turning out. So, that's a fairly low bar for turning out well, but only a third of them do. So, man, I'm not a big fan of lavishing money. And I hear the Oilers are out on Brett Connolly, out on Jonas Donskoy, and it doesn't break my heart to hear that, honestly, because I'm not that keen on an overpay, but anyway, we'll see what happens, Bruce. Hopefully they can make a decent deal with somebody who can come in and play on the top line wing tomorrow. And
well, maybe they circle back on Alex Chason when all is said and done. Now they can give him the big bucks that he clearly warrants off the last season. I'm being facetious, but the idea that scoring wingers are just readily available, well, when you see the feeding frenzy over Brett Connolly, it's kind of suggestive of otherwise, that they're not going to come cheap. And unfortunately, the aftermath of the Chiarelli era is that the Oilers are almost devoid of talented wingers.
Yeah,
natural wingers. Yeah. So I mean, well, you have to get into it in the sense that they have to fix the problem somehow, and now they got a little bit more maneuverability in how they could do it. And, my hope was that maybe they could, for instance, trade Chris Russell for maybe an overpaid winger who, is getting more than he's worth, but at least is a proven NHL player that might, find the range on a line with the top-notch center like Edmonton has in abundance. But clearly that didn't happen, and it went right down to the last day, June 30th. This was the deadline for buyouts, and so if anything was going to break, it was going to happen today, and unfortunately it broke for Andrei Sekera. This is the third summer in a row something's broken for that poor fellow.
All right, let's leave it there, Bruce. Thanks for talking.
All right, thanks for listening, everyone.
And in the meantime and in between times, this has been another edition of the Cult of Hockey podcast.